Hello and welcome to Solomoriah Speaks, Episode 2, The Joy of RPG Design, the Bob Ross Way. Before we get started, I'm going to run the colors across the screen that you're going to need to paint along with me today. If those words sound familiar, you're probably a fan of Bob Ross, or at least you've seen an episode or two of his show, The Joy of Painting. Bob had a technique that involved the use of what looked like very inappropriate brushes in some cases. In fact, in his very first episode, he painted an entire landscape using only a 2-inch brush, the size you'd usually use to paint the trim on your windows if you were painting your house. Way larger than you'd normally expect. If you're not familiar with Bob Ross, you probably should go watch one of his videos just to get an idea of where we're going with this discussion today about RPG design. I'm going to use a lot of his words and a lot of his concepts in explaining my technique, my method of creating a campaign world. So if you haven't seen one, you might want to go find one. I look for one on YouTube. I'm sure you can find that very first episode. In fact, if you do a little looking, I'll wait. I'll just kill a little time here. Well, a lot of time has passed since I started rewinding my clock with my sonic screwdriver. I'm afraid that this video has proven rather difficult for me to create. There's a lot of material that is related to the subject I want to talk about, and as a consequence, I keep digressing. So I'm going to try to keep it to the point this time. Let's see if this works out. I was talking about the Bob Ross method of campaign world creation. And I asked you to go take a look at some Bob Ross videos if you haven't seen one. I hope by now everybody's had a chance. But anyway, Bob has a lot of quotes, and if you look up sites about Bob Ross, you'll find a lot of quotes from him. And they're relevant, but they're not the point of this video. The point of this video is actually what he didn't say, what he did. Bob did not paint a leaf, and then a leaf, and then a leaf. Bob took his big old 2-inch brush, loaded it up with paint, and painted a whole branch of leaves, one tap at a time. Every time he'd tap, he'd get another branch, another group of leaves that your mind then would see hanging off of a branch, whether it was deciduous tree with leaves. He could do a pine tree with his fan brush and just tap it in, and the tree just appears, and you see it. He could take a palette knife and in a few moments sketch out an entire mountain or an entire range of mountains, and in a few more moments mix up a couple of colors for a highlight and low light, and apply them with his knife ever so gently, and a little brush work to smooth in the bottom, and you've got a very believable mountain range. He didn't paint something that was very specific. He knew he wanted a mountain range. He really didn't think about the exact details of the mountain range. You might think, I want a big mountain here and a big mountain there, or a big mountain in the middle, but he didn't really plan all the mountains, all the details of it. And the same thing applied to his trees. He would decide he wanted a tree, he would draw a tree. Draw one big old mark through there. He called it a bravery test, and then he would fill in the branches, and he had a tree. Everything that Bob did, he did in a kind of a painter's shorthand. And this is relevant to campaign creation. This is the technique that I use. It's a technique that I recommend. Do not sit down to create your campaign world with the idea in your mind that you're going to write a gazetteer, that you're going to write one of those big books that is full of details about how every bit of the campaign world works, where you list everyone down to the last guardsman in the castle, every town down to the last 200-person village out there, or even 20-person hamlet. Don't do that. Don't even think you want to do that, because you don't want to do that. If you do all that work, number one, the amount of time it's going to take you, even if you are brilliant and fast, is long. It's going to take you a long time to get through that, which is going to delay starting your campaign. It is kind of fun to create that stuff, but then when you get to your actual campaign, you'll have so much material written down, you won't remember all of it. And you'll kick yourself every time you get an adventure over and you go back and look at the material and you go, oh, I forgot this guy or that guy, this location or that magic item, whatever bit of history of your campaign world that you wanted to make sure you got in. Maybe you actually said it wrong and now you've completely messed it up. Don't do that. Create your campaign world in sketches. Let your player's imagination fill in the blanks. I used this as an example somewhere else before. One of my favorite intros at the beginning of a book is from Stephen King's Gunslinger. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. I didn't say very many words, but you have an image in your mind. If you've seen any American-style westerns, even just a commercial, you can see the man in black. He's probably on horseback in your imagination, because that's how it works in the West. He's going across some arid grassland. Maybe there's mountains in the distance, maybe there's not. Maybe you see a sunset or a sunrise. But you see the man in black, and you see him fleeing, and you see the gunslinger, and you have a good image in your mind of what the gunslinger looks like. Probably a big, rangy man, not a huge guy, but a tall, and he's wearing a white hat or maybe a brown one. He's not wearing a black hat like the man in black, because he's the gunslinger. We didn't call him sheriff, so maybe a brown hat is more appropriate than a white hat. But he is pursuing the man in black, probably on horseback, because that's how those stories work. But there's only one sentence there, and that one sentence paints a picture. Build your campaign world that way. Build your campaign world that way. Any place the players aren't going to go in this session can probably be described in a few lines. You don't need to say a lot about it. My players in my Western Lands playtest campaign have not yet gone to Ravenstone, and they know basically nothing about it. And here's a secret. Neither do I. I haven't finished creating Ravenstone. I probably will never finish creating Ravenstone. I'm not even really far enough into Slateholme yet. And that's close to where my players are. I'm hoping to send them there soon. But right now I'm delaying them with another dungeon so that I can get some time to get a map put together. I've got a sketch, but it's not quite enough of a sketch. I need a little bit more. I need some street names and so forth. I'm not going to name every street. I'm not going to name every building. I'm not going to place every single person in town, because that would be insane. I'm not even going to try to do most of it. I may never write statistics for the Prince of Slateholme, because I may never need them. If I find myself needing them, I'll create them. If I find myself needing them in the middle of an adventure, I will create them in the middle of the adventure. I can sketch out a few numbers, armor class, magic weapon, hit dice, or levels, hit points and stuff quickly. And then later, after the session, I can sit down, take what I've already created in the heat of the moment, and flesh it out. One of the things I used to love to do when I was first getting into role playing was to read through the old books, the old classic D&D books. Here we go. This is actually my friend's DMG. My friend Alan, he passed away a few years ago. Mine is elsewhere in the house, but this is his. But I would go through the DMG, absolutely the textbook for running games of the era. And if you flip through the magic items in here and look at them, there's many named magic items. Those named magic items, not even just the artifacts, but many items that have names. Each one has a story, but the story is just a sketch. The places are mentioned, but not detailed. The book is full of mystery. And I don't know how much of that mystery actually existed in Gary's own campaign, and how much of it he sketched out and never actually got around to. But I'm confident the amount of information he was working with, he probably sketched at least some of it out. I imagine a lot of it was built in play. And if Gary didn't do that, if Gary actually had everything detailed in advance, good. I'm not that person, and most people aren't that person. Most people don't have the ability to remember an encyclopedia of knowledge, even information that they themselves created. It's difficult to remember all the details. Now, corollary to this, you build your campaign world out of sketches. You have a world map at a large scale without a lot of detail on it. And you, in your mind, you know there are villages in this area, but you don't draw them in. You know they're there. When the players get there, they'll find your villagers, and you can deal with it at that point. You don't even have to name them. You just have to have some kind of vague idea. Maybe you don't know much about any of the map. Maybe you haven't made decisions yet. That's fine. Make the decisions when you need to. You won't have to remember them as long that way. If you decide who lives in a particular town months of real time before your players ever get there, you're not going to remember what you wrote. But if you make it up on the spot or the night before, which is probably smarter, honestly, you're going to have a lot easier time remembering what you've created. Think about it that way. But I would say the corollary to that is don't sweat the errors. How many times in the real world can you think of situations where 2 or 3 people talking about the same event describe it differently? Maybe it's a small difference, maybe it's a big difference, maybe it becomes a positive whodunit. Criminal, true crime stories, or just ordinary anecdotes about real life. I tell stories, everybody tells stories about their lives, but I'm never sure if I've remembered everything exactly right. If an NPC in your game describes the mysterious and creepy rituals performed in a particular village, and another NPC talks about what a nice place it is, you decide which is true. If you mess up and get them confused and you have 2 different NPCs that tell two different stories, there's all kinds of possibilities. Maybe neither one of them's right. Maybe they're both right. Maybe it is a nice place except on certain days of the week or the month, certain holy days, or maybe there's a part of town that you don't really want to go into that the nice people don't talk about. The point is, don't sweat it when you make an error speaking on behalf of an NPC or otherwise relating information to your players. Your players may have heard the story wrong when they first heard it, in their childhood before play even began. Don't sweat it if you make an error on that kind of stuff. Just kind of stonewall. Give them an enigmatic grin and say, I don't know, maybe you need to figure this out. That will actually inflame some people. They will actually go nuts. Their characters investigating every last detail. And, okay, that could be annoying, but seriously, this is a perfect time to give them hooks. Lead them off into interesting dungeons or off against compelling opponents. Let your campaign evolve on its own. I'm going to end with telling you something about how I run games. Now, my playtest game is an exception because I'm literally playtesting materials, so I'm not concerned about building a coherent campaign. But I don't begin a regular campaign with a plan for where it's going to end. I don't have any idea who the big bad guy is going to be at the end of it. I don't know any of that stuff. I don't want to plan that. You have to get a feel for your player character party. Even if you know your players fairly well, a new party may bring out new aspects of the players and they may interact in different ways. I like to use a few small canned adventures, or maybe even bigger canned adventures to start with. In basic fantasy, I would probably use Morgan's Fort and possibly the Chaotic Caves together. Or I would, if I was starting a higher level group, I might go with some of the other adventures out of our catalog, or a classic adventure. I own many of them, but start out with something canned, something standard and normal. Let's say normal. Run your players through it. Let them explore and expand, and pay attention to what interests them. If you have a bunch of characters who are trying to get themselves in trouble, or you have a bunch of characters who are trying to be heroes. It makes a huge difference in how you're going to run your campaign. Once you have a feel for the party you're working with and how they're behaving, how they're acting, and so forth, then you can begin to plan your own custom adventures, or you can begin selecting adventures and maybe modifying them to suit the party so that they will make your game more engaging, more interesting to the players. But I always start out with something very standard. Ordinary. I hate to use the word ordinary, but something that allows any kind of play so that you can see what kind of play is going to interest your players. The only Bob Ross quote that I'm going to actually throw in here in this is his comment that in our world, we don't make mistakes, we have happy accidents. Do not be afraid to let your players tell you what's going on. If you have a mystery that you yourself haven't actually figured out yet, or maybe you have, but your players think up a better answer, you don't have to tell them you didn't think of it first. Just scribble a few notes down and make sure you keep track of what's going on. But and I'm not saying let your players dictate. Don't let your players drive the game in that sense. Unless you're running a truly narrative game and everyone's invited to participate in narrative behavior. But if players are just playing themselves and they aren't controlling some bits of the world around them, playing their own characters rather, not themselves, and not controlling events around them as in a narrative game, if they're not doing that, then no, don't let them drive the game. But absolutely take advantage of their imaginations, because if you do that, you can make your world more interesting. I'll recommend a little reading. What I just described is one way to avoid what I call single creator syndrome. Take a look at my blog for information about that. Don't think I've got any of the blog posts that are relevant to that, but I really think that this is a good approach, one approach to avoiding single creator syndrome to make the game more interesting. So that's it for, today, for the last year, however long it's been I've been working on this video. Not sure what the next video is going to be, but I'll let everybody know when I get ready to post it. One more thing, I have just begun the promotion, the art promotion for the Iron Falcon Handbook of Monsters. I believe I have a copy here. I have another video on the subject if you want to take a look at it. I'm talking about how I'm going to fund getting pictures into this book using the one picture that I've already paid for, this excellent piece of artwork by Alexander Cook. Al's art has graced many covers of many items from both Iron Falcon and Basic Fantasy, and he's also provided some very nice interior work. I hope to be able to employ his services as well as other artists to do the interiors for this book. But take a look at that video and jump in and buy a t-shirt or a bag or whatever interests you if you're curious about that, interested in supporting that. Again, that's all I've got for you. Have a nice day.